She walked into the large music hall with her head held high. The wooden floor creaked lightly under her polished shoes, and the smell of varnish and old music sheets filled the air. She had been performing for years, playing for audiences that admired her skill, and she was used to people watching her fingers glide across the keys. Today, she felt confident. This stage, this audience, this piano, they all belonged to her, or so she thought. The room was buzzing with energy. Students, teachers, and curious visitors filled the seats, some whispering to each other, others tapping their feet in excitement. She noticed a small group gathered near the side, quietly observing the other performers who were preparing. Among them, she saw a girl who moved with a calm, careful grace. She was small and unassuming, and the way she touched the piano bench suggested she might be blind. A soft curiosity drew her eyes, but she quickly shook it off. She had seen many students, many performers, and this girl seemed like another novice trying to find her place. The pianist smiled to herself, a hint of superiority in the expression. She had learned early in her career that confidence mattered, and she had built her reputation on it. She believed that talent was easy to spot, that skill could not be hidden, and in her experience, most people who looked nervous or quiet often could not match her expertise. The girl at the side looked fragile, almost as if she might break if the piano keys were too heavy. A soft laugh escaped her lips, barely audible, but enough to show her amusement. She glanced at her own hands, long and practiced, and flexed her fingers in anticipation. She had prepared her piece meticulously, rehearsing it countless times. Each note was memorized, each movement calculated. She prided herself on her technique, her ability to perform under pressure, and her understanding of music that made her stand out among her peers. The thought of sharing a stage with someone like the girl at the side barely crossed her mind. She was certain there was nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, the blind girl was moving quietly, touching the piano with gentle hands as if greeting an old friend. There was a sense of calm about her that drew a few curious glances from nearby students, but most ignored her. She had grown used to being overlooked. People often underestimated her because she could not see, but she had learned to feel the music, to understand its rhythms and patterns in a way others could not. Her mind worked differently, but it worked beautifully. She could hear the tiniest nuances in sound, feel vibrations in her fingers, and translate them into melodies that resonated deeply. The pianist noticed her movement again and shook her head slightly, suppressing another smile. She could not imagine how someone without sight could truly understand the piano. Surely it would be clumsy, maybe even comical. She felt a small thrill at the idea that she would play flawlessly while the girl fumbled through her notes. It was not unkindness exactly. It was more a matter of habit. She had seen many performers falter, and it had become second nature to expect the worst from someone who appeared inexperienced. The atmosphere shifted as the first performers began their pieces. Music flowed through the hall, filling every corner with sound. Some played with elegance, some with emotion, but there was a pattern, a rhythm to the event that everyone seemed to follow. The pianist listened politely, nodding along, occasionally offering a small clap. She kept her focus sharp, practicing the mental run-through of her own performance, imagining each note she would play. Her mind was occupied with details, the tempo, the dynamics, the emotion she wanted to convey. From her peripheral vision, she continued to watch the blind girl. The girl approached the piano slowly, her fingers brushing over the keys to memorize the layout. There was no hesitation, no panic. The pianist frowned slightly, confused. How could someone so small and quiet move with such certainty? It did not fit her expectations. She felt a flicker of doubt, quickly dismissed. Surely this was just a peculiar confidence, a brief moment before failure. The blind girl took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. There was a moment of silence, a pause that seemed to stretch for longer than it should. The pianist leaned back slightly, ready to smirk if things went wrong. Her eyes scanned the audience. Some were curious, some doubtful, mirroring her own anticipation. She noticed a few teachers watching intently, their expressions unreadable. The pianist felt a surge of superiority, believing that soon they would see what she already knew. the girl would struggle. But then the first note rang out. Clear, confident, and precise. The pianist's eyebrows shot up slightly in surprise. She leaned forward just a little, listening more carefully. The melody flowed effortlessly, each note perfectly balanced, each phrase shaped with intention. There was no hesitation, no mistake, only music that seemed to reach out and touch every listener. The pianist's fingers twitched slightly, almost unconsciously, as if responding to something she had not expected. The audience began to pay closer attention. Whispers turned into quiet awe. The girl's hands moved gracefully across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, completely absorbed in the music. The pianist watched, astonished, as the melodies became more complex, more emotional, drawing the listeners into a world created solely by her touch. She had not anticipated this. She had assumed simplicity, maybe clumsiness, but what she heard was artistry. A strange feeling stirred inside the pianist. It was not anger or jealousy yet, but something unfamiliar. A mix of surprise, admiration, and a tiny sting of humility. She realized that she had underestimated the blind girl in every possible way. The certainty she had felt when entering the hall began to waver. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize what she was hearing. How could someone without sight play with such mastery? How could she convey emotion so purely without being able to see the audience, the stage, the hall? She caught herself tapping her foot unconsciously, a gesture she usually reserved for her own performances. The rhythm, the expression, the control. It was all there, in a form she had not imagined. She felt the first seeds of doubt grow into a quiet question. Had she been wrong about her assumptions, about her judgments, about what it meant to be truly skilled? The music continued, flowing through the hall in waves that captivated everyone. The pianist could no longer look away, no longer entertain the idea that this would be a simple, forgettable performance. She found herself watching, listening, noticing the subtle dynamics, the delicate phrasing, the way each note seemed to connect with the next in a seamless, emotional chain. The blind girl was not just playing. She was telling a story, and every listener was drawn in. By the time the last notes faded, the hall was silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, slowly, applause erupted. It was not polite or restrained. It was genuine, powerful, and immediate. People were standing, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The pianist sat frozen, her hands still on the piano bench, heart pounding, mind racing. The girl had done what she had not expected. She had done what no one had predicted. And in that moment, the pianist realized that the assumptions she had carried into the hall, the doubts, the laughter, the dismissal, had been completely wrong. The blind girl rose from the piano, a quiet smile on her face, acknowledging the audience without arrogance, without seeking praise. She had prepared for this moment with dedication and focus, but there was no need for showmanship. The pianist could not help but feel a mix of respect and awe. She had come to the hall confident, ready to judge, ready to shine, and instead, she had witnessed something extraordinary. As the girl moved away, the pianist's hands dropped to her lap. She exhaled slowly, trying to process the performance. She had thought she was the only one capable of such control, such emotion, such expression. And now she understood that talent could appear in forms she had never imagined. She felt a quiet shift inside her, a recognition that her own perceptions had been limited. For the first time, she wondered what it truly meant to play, to perform, to touch hearts with music. The audience continued to cheer, and the hall buzzed with energy, but the pianist was lost in thought. She realized that today had marked a turning point, a moment when the world had quietly reminded her that humility and openness were as important as skill. And somewhere in that realization, she found a spark of curiosity, a desire to understand, to learn, and to see talent not as a competition, but as a gift that could appear in the most unexpected forms. She looked toward the blind girl one last time, who was now speaking softly with a teacher, smiling without any need for attention. There was no arrogance, only quiet confidence and the calm satisfaction of someone who had done what she loved. The pianist felt a stirring in her chest, a mix of admiration, respect, and a hint of inspiration. She had entered the hall thinking she would be the star, but she left with something far more valuable. A new perspective, a new understanding, and the realization that music, in its purest form, could change everything. And so, the pianist sat for a moment longer, letting the sound of the audience fade, letting the weight of the performance settle in her mind. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be more to learn, more to witness, and more to understand. But in that hall, in that moment, she had seen something she would never forget, and it had quietly begun to change her. The blind girl walked back to the quiet corner of the hall, her hands still feeling the air where the piano had been. The applause still rang in her ears, but she was calm, not distracted by it. She had learned early that sound, not sight, was the true measure of connection. Every note she played was not just for the audience. It was for herself, to express the feelings that words could not hold. The hall had been full of people, yet for her, it had been a world of music alone. She thought about the hours she had spent practicing alone. Her days were filled with the piano, with melodies running through her mind even when her fingers were still. She could feel the patterns of each piece, memorizing them not by sight but by touch and by memory. Every key had a story, every chord a feeling. Some days were frustrating, when a piece refused to flow or a hand grew tired, but she always returned to it, patient and persistent. Music had been her companion, her teacher, and sometimes her only friend. Her parents had supported her from the beginning, encouraging her to explore the world through sound. They had never treated her blindness as a limitation. Instead, they emphasized her strengths, showing her that determination and heart mattered more than sight. Teachers had been helpful too, guiding her fingers across the keys, explaining techniques, and teaching her to trust her ears. Over time, she had learned to rely on subtle cues, on vibrations beneath her fingertips, on the resonance that told her when she had struck the right note. She thought about her first real piano. It was old and slightly out of tune, but she had loved it. She remembered sitting for hours, trying to replicate the melodies she had heard on the radio or in her head. Sometimes she would fall asleep with her fingers resting on the keys, dreaming of music that would never end. That piano had been the beginning, the spark that made her believe that she could do more than just play notes. She could create something that mattered. Even though she was blind, she had never felt limited in her understanding of music. She had learned to read Braille music sheets, translating the raised dots into melodies in her mind before they reached her fingers. It was a different kind of reading, a different kind of thinking, but it worked. She had practiced it daily, and it had allowed her to explore complex pieces that others thought impossible for someone in her position. Every challenge had become a lesson, every struggle a step toward mastery. As she prepared for her next performance, she focused on small details. She approached the piano, feeling its texture and the distance between the keys. Her fingers brushed across the notes lightly, memorizing the distances, imagining the flow of each chord. She closed her eyes, not to see but to visualize in her mind, picturing the music as a landscape she could travel. Each movement of her hands was mapped out, precise yet flexible, ready to respond to the music itself. She noticed the other performers around her, their nervous movements, the whispered instructions from teachers, the shifting audience members. She felt no fear, only concentration. She had learned that performance was not about showing off or impressing others. It was about connecting with the music and letting it speak through her. Confidence came from preparation, from dedication, from knowing the piece inside and out. She did not need to see their faces to understand their reactions. She could feel the energy in the room, the tension, and the excitement, all through the vibrations and the subtle hum of the hall. Her mind wandered briefly to the pianist who had performed before her. She had noticed the confidence, the elegance, the polished technique. It was impressive, and yet, she had not let it intimidate her. She understood that talent came in many forms, and that performance was not a competition but a journey. She reminded herself to stay focused, to let the music guide her rather than the reactions of others. Every note was a choice, every pause intentional, every chord a reflection of her heart. The hall grew quieter as the next performance was about to begin. She approached the piano slowly, feeling the familiar surface beneath her fingers. She sat down, aligning herself comfortably, hands hovering just above the keys. She took a deep breath, letting her mind clear, letting the sounds she had practiced countless times flow naturally. There was a rhythm to preparation, a ritual that centered her and allowed her to enter the music fully. When she began to play, the first notes were tentative but clear. She felt them, understood them, and let them guide her fingers. The music unfolded like a story, each phrase building on the last, each note carrying emotion and intent. The audience listened, captivated, though she could not see their faces. She felt the vibrations of the hall, the subtle reactions of those around her, and let them shape her interpretation. Music, she knew, was alive, and it responded to the space it inhabited. As she continued, her confidence grew. The melodies became richer, the harmonies more complex, and the rhythm steadier. She moved with the piano, her body swaying gently, her fingers dancing lightly across the keys. The experience was immersive. She lost herself in the music, forgetting the hall, the audience, and even herself. There was only the sound, the vibration, and the emotion that flowed from her heart through her hands. Every mistake she had ever made in practice seemed to vanish in the flow. She had learned from them, internalized them, and now they guided her choices. Her ears were keen, listening to every resonance, every tone, every echo. She could tell when a chord needed more emphasis, when a note required a softer touch, when a phrase should linger. The music was her language, and she spoke it fluently, with clarity and depth that surprised even herself. She remembered the advice of her first teacher. Feel the music. Do not just play it. Let it become part of you. Those words had stayed with her, guiding her approach to every piece. Today, on this stage, she embodied that advice. Each note was not just played but lived. She could feel the connection with every listener, even those who could not see her. The vibrations carried the emotion, the passion, and the story she wanted to tell. By the time she finished, there was a moment of silence, a pause as the audience absorbed the music. Then, gradually, applause began to build, first soft, then louder, until the hall was filled with it. She smiled quietly, acknowledging the audience with a calm nod. There was no need for theatrics. The music had spoken for her. She felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet pride that came from knowing she had expressed herself fully, without pretension or fear. She rose from the piano, hands brushing over the keys one last time. The sound lingered in the air, a gentle reminder of the journey she had taken with the music. She felt a warmth in her chest, a deep satisfaction that went beyond recognition or applause. It was the feeling of having shared something meaningful, of having created a connection that transcended words or appearances. Music, she realized, was a bridge between hearts, a language that everyone could understand if they listened closely. As she stepped away from the piano, she thought briefly about the pianist she had observed earlier. She had been confident, skilled, and polished, yet there was a lesson in humility hidden in her own performance. Talent was not always what it seemed, and perception could be deceptive. She had experienced that firsthand, and it reinforced her belief that dedication, focus, and heart mattered more than any external impression. Music was not a competition. It was an expression, and each performer had their own voice. Walking back to the quiet corner of the hall, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. There would be more performances, more stages, more audiences, but each was an opportunity to share her music, to touch hearts, and to continue her journey. She understood that every challenge, every doubt, every assumption she faced was part of the process, shaping her growth and deepening her connection to the art she loved. And so, with a calm confidence and a quiet joy, she prepared herself for whatever would come next, knowing that music would always guide her way. The pianist sat backstage, tuning her thoughts like she would tune a piano. She could still hear the faint echo of the blind girl's performance, and it lingered in her mind like a song she could not shake. She had expected simplicity, perhaps even mistakes, but what she had heard was anything but. The music had carried emotion, precision, and depth that she had not anticipated. For the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty, questioning her assumptions and her own confidence. She watched from the wings as other performers took their turns. Each one had skill, some more than others, but none seemed to capture the same magic she had witnessed. The audience responded politely, clapping, nodding, but the energy was not the same. She realized that the hall had been filled with more than sound during the blind girl's performance. It had been filled with feeling, with connection, with something that could not be measured by technique alone. And it unsettled her. The blind girl, meanwhile, was preparing for her next piece in a quiet, familiar routine. She approached the piano slowly, letting her hands rest lightly on the keys before finding the familiar positions. Her mind was clear, focused on the music rather than the audience. She could feel the stage beneath her, the vibrations of the floor, and even the air around her as the room settled into a hushed anticipation. To her, the piano was a friend, and the music was a conversation. She had nothing to prove. She simply wanted to share what she felt. The pianist observed this quietly, trying to understand what she was seeing. There was no nervous fidgeting, no desperate need for approval, only a quiet assurance that came from years of dedication and practice. She wondered how someone could achieve such confidence without the usual feedback that sight provided. It was a mystery, and she felt both curiosity and a slight envy. She had always relied on appearances, on gestures, on the energy of a room, and yet here was someone who transcended all that. The blind girl began to play, and the notes rose into the hall like gentle waves. They were precise yet filled with warmth. Each chord spoke of thoughtfulness and care, each melody of experience and heart. The pianist's fingers twitched unconsciously, as though responding to a rhythm she could not quite replicate. She listened closely, noticing subtleties she had not anticipated. The dynamics, the timing, the phrasing, they were all deliberate, all perfect, yet so natural that it seemed as if the music was flowing through the girl rather than from her. She could hear the audience reacting, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, completely immersed. It was not just applause that the music had earned. It was attention, engagement, and a collective holding of breath. The pianist felt a twinge in her chest, a combination of admiration and discomfort. She had always been the one to command the room, to draw in the audience, to hold their focus effortlessly. Yet now, she realized that someone else could do it too, and perhaps even better. The blind girl's hands moved with delicate precision, her fingers gliding over the keys like a painter's brush over a canvas. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The music was not rushed or forced. It was alive, breathing in harmony with the performer's spirit. The pianist began to notice details she had never paid attention to before. The slight arch of a hand, the subtle lifting of a finger, the way the notes lingered in the air just long enough to be felt before fading. There was a poetry to it, a story that could not be told in words alone. She remembered her own rehearsals, the countless hours she had spent perfecting technique, the mental calculations of each piece, the discipline that had defined her career. And yet, she realized that there was something missing from her performances, a spark that could not be taught or forced. The blind girl had it in abundance, a natural expression of music that came from deep within, and it struck the pianist profoundly. She felt a mix of humility and wonder, a recognition that talent could manifest in ways she had not imagined. The audience's reaction grew stronger as the blind girl moved into more complex passages. The music swelled, then softened, then rose again, taking listeners on an emotional journey. There were no mistakes, no hesitation, only a seamless flow that seemed both effortless and intentional. The pianist could not help but lean closer, straining to understand how someone could play with such mastery without the use of sight. She found herself studying the girl's hands, her posture, her focus, trying to glean the secret. It was not a secret in the usual sense. The blind girl's skill came from dedication, patience, and a profound love for music. She had spent years learning to trust her fingers, to memorize patterns, to feel the resonance of each note. She had developed an inner rhythm, a way of listening and responding that went beyond traditional instruction. Every challenge she had faced had honed her awareness, making her sensitive to the subtlest changes in tone, tempo, and emotion. The pianist realized that this was something she could never replicate simply by technique. It was a gift that had been earned through perseverance. As the performance continued, the pianist felt a stirring of emotion she had not expected. She remembered her early days, the nervousness of her first performances, the thrill of connecting with an audience. She realized that she had grown so focused on skill and precision that she had sometimes forgotten the heart of music. Watching the blind girl reminded her that music was not just about playing notes correctly, but about conveying feeling, telling a story, and touching lives. The realization was humbling, and it made her want to listen even more closely, to learn even more deeply. The blind girl reached the final passages of her piece, the music rising and falling like waves against a shore. Each note was a testament to her journey, her patience, and her dedication. The hall seemed to breathe with her, the vibrations echoing through the floor, the walls, the hearts of the audience. When the last note lingered and faded, there was a pause, a collective holding of breath as if the room itself wanted to savor the moment. Then, slowly, applause began to swell, first gentle, then stronger, until the hall rang with it. The pianist sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. She felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Admiration for the blind girl's talent, humility in the face of such mastery, and a spark of inspiration that she had not felt in years. The performance had been flawless, but more than that, it had been alive, breathing, and deeply moving. The pianist realized that she had underestimated not just the girl, but the very essence of music itself. It was not merely about technique, recognition, or competition. It was about expression, connection, and authenticity. The blind girl rose from the piano, calm and poised, acknowledging the audience with a quiet smile. There was no boastfulness, no need for praise beyond the music itself. She had shared her heart, and the audience had felt it. The pianist, still in the wings, felt a newfound respect and admiration. She understood that the girl's success was not a threat, but a lesson. A reminder that there was always more to learn, always more to observe, and always more ways to grow. As the audience continued to clap and cheer, the pianist reflected on her own journey. She had entered the hall confident, ready to perform, expecting to shine above all others. Yet she had been reminded that confidence could be a fragile thing, and that humility and openness were equally important. The blind girl had shown her that talent was not always obvious, and that true skill could emerge in unexpected ways. It was a lesson in perception, respect, and the transformative power of dedication. The hall slowly settled into a quiet hum as the next performers prepared. The pianist took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. She realized that her perspective had shifted. She would never again underestimate someone based on appearance, circumstance, or expectation. The blind girl had challenged her assumptions and opened her eyes to a deeper understanding of music and human potential. As she prepared to step onto the stage for her own performance, the pianist felt a renewed sense of purpose. She thought about the lessons she had observed, the importance of heart, the value of perseverance, and the power of authenticity. She adjusted her posture, let her fingers hover over the keys, and focused on the music that had captivated her so profoundly. She knew that the journey ahead was not just about playing flawlessly, but about connecting, expressing, and learning. And in that quiet moment, before her own notes filled the hall, she felt a sense of anticipation that was different from any before. It was not just about her performance, but about what she could discover, what she could learn, and how she could grow. The blind girl's music had set a new standard, not in competition, but in inspiration. The pianist felt ready to embrace that challenge, to explore deeper, and to let the music speak in ways she had never imagined. The stage awaited, and with it, a chance to redefine her understanding of what it meant to truly perform. The pianist walked onto the stage, the polished floor reflecting the bright lights above. She felt a mix of nerves and determination, her heart beating faster than usual. This was not the same confident walk she had taken before the blind girl's performance. Now, every step carried a weight of reflection and awareness. She knew she could not rely solely on technique or reputation. She needed to play with heart, with honesty, and with the emotion that the blind girl had so effortlessly conveyed. She sat at the piano and let her fingers hover over the keys, feeling their smooth surfaces beneath her touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and thought about the music she had chosen. Every note, every chord, every pause mattered now more than ever. She began to play, and the sound filled the hall. It was precise, polished, and technically perfect, just as it always had been. But she noticed something different. She was listening differently. She was aware of the vibrations, the energy in the room, and the subtle reactions of the audience. She wanted her music to reach them, not just impress them. The first few measures flowed smoothly, but she felt an urge to push beyond her usual boundaries. She let herself slow down, linger on certain notes, and add gentle emphasis where the music felt alive. She remembered the blind girl's performance, the way each phrase had been meaningful, intentional, and deeply expressive. The pianist wanted to capture some of that essence, to allow the music to speak for itself and to reach the hearts of the listeners. As she continued, she could feel the shift in the room. The audience leaned forward, listening more intently, drawn in by the emotion behind the notes. The pianist felt a connection she had not experienced before. It was not about showing off skill or drawing attention to herself. It was about conveying a story, a feeling, a message that could not be spoken in words. The piano was her voice, and she let it speak with honesty and vulnerability. She played with more sensitivity than she ever had, noticing how each note interacted with the hall, how the vibrations traveled through the floor and into the seats. She imagined the blind girl sitting somewhere in the audience, judging not with criticism but with understanding, and it inspired her to continue with courage. The pianist realized that true performance required more than mastery of technique. It required openness, empathy, and a willingness to share oneself fully. The music rose and fell like waves, moving through moments of intensity and calm. She felt herself transported, absorbed by the flow, no longer merely performing but becoming part of the music. The audience responded in kind, some closing their eyes, others leaning forward, all attentive. The pianist sensed that she had captured their attention, not through showmanship, but through sincerity. The hall felt alive, each person a thread in the tapestry of sound that she wove with her fingers. Midway through the piece, she encountered a passage that was usually simple for her, yet now it carried a new weight. She approached it carefully, letting her fingers respond to the emotion she felt rather than relying solely on habit. Each note became deliberate, each phrase a reflection of her understanding of music as a living, breathing expression. She realized that she was no longer playing for recognition or praise. She was playing to connect, to communicate, and to honor the power of music itself. The pianist glanced briefly at the audience, feeling their engagement, and then returned her focus to the keys. She noticed how the blind girl, sitting quietly in the corner after her own performance, had affected the way she approached music. There was no competition here, only inspiration. The pianist understood that the true measure of skill was not technical perfection alone, but the ability to touch hearts, to make listeners feel, and to convey a story through sound. She wanted to reach that level of authenticity, and now she had a glimpse of what it felt like. As the piece moved toward its climax, she played with a renewed sense of freedom and courage. The notes swelled, carried by emotion, and filled the hall with a richness she had rarely achieved before. The audience felt it, their energy shifting in response to her music. The pianist realized that she had tapped into something deeper than technique, a connection to herself, to the audience, and to the art she loved. She was no longer performing to impress. She was performing to express. The final passages were delicate and thoughtful. She allowed each note to linger, each chord to resonate fully before moving on. The hall was silent except for the sound of the piano, and in that silence, the music spoke louder than ever. She could feel the collective emotion of the audience, their attention and anticipation, and it gave her courage. She played with care, with passion, and with honesty, feeling that every note was a bridge between herself and those listening. When the last note faded, there was a brief moment of quiet before the audience erupted into applause. It was heartfelt, sincere, and powerful, filling the hall with energy and appreciation. The pianist exhaled slowly, a sense of relief and fulfillment washing over her. She had performed not just with skill, but with understanding, empathy, and emotion. She felt a quiet pride, not in being better than anyone else, but in having shared something meaningful through her music. The blind girl rose quietly from her seat, her hands clasped gently, her expression calm and serene. She approached the pianist with a warm smile, offering words of encouragement that were simple yet heartfelt. There was no jealousy, no arrogance, only mutual respect and recognition. The pianist felt a connection she had never anticipated, a bond forged through the shared language of music. She realized that admiration and inspiration could coexist, and that learning from others was a strength, not a weakness. After the applause had settled, the pianist and the blind girl spoke quietly backstage. They shared experiences, stories of practice and perseverance, and reflections on what it meant to perform. The pianist listened intently, absorbing the wisdom that came not just from skill, but from dedication, patience, and heart. The blind girl spoke of the challenges she had overcome, the ways she had learned to trust her senses, and the moments of quiet triumph that had shaped her journey. The pianist felt inspired, realizing that talent was only part of the equation, and that resilience, determination, and authenticity were equally important. As the evening progressed, the pianist reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that music was not a competition, but a shared experience, a way to communicate what words could not express. She thought about how easily she had underestimated someone based on appearances and assumptions, and she resolved to approach every performance, every musician, and every audience with openness and humility. The blind girl had changed her perspective, showing her that true talent often lies beyond what the eye can see. The hall eventually emptied, leaving behind a quiet echo of applause and music. The pianist lingered, sitting at the piano for a moment, letting the experience settle in her mind and heart. She thought about the journey ahead, the pieces she had yet to play, and the lessons she had yet to learn. The blind girl's influence would remain with her, a reminder that dedication, heart, and authenticity were as important as skill, and that the power of music lay in its ability to touch lives. As she left the hall, the pianist felt a renewed sense of purpose. She walked with a lightness she had not felt before, carrying the memory of the evening and the inspiration she had gained. She knew that every future performance would be approached differently, with greater awareness, respect, and connection. The blind girl's presence had left an indelible mark, reminding her that greatness could be found in unexpected places, and that true artistry came from the heart. The next day, the pianist arrived at the music hall early, wanting to practice, but also wanting to reflect. She walked slowly through the empty room, listening to the soft echo of her footsteps, and thinking about the events of the previous evening. The memory of the blind girl's performance lingered vividly in her mind. It had been more than just skill. It had been emotion, connection, and authenticity, a reminder that music had the power to touch hearts in ways that technical mastery alone could not. She found a piano in the corner and sat down, letting her fingers hover above the keys. She began to play slowly, experimenting, feeling each note, and letting herself explore the emotional depths she had glimpsed in the blind girl's performance. She realized that she had been so focused on perfection and recognition that she had sometimes lost the essence of what music could do. Now she wanted to play differently, not just to impress but to communicate, to reach, to inspire. Her practice was no longer about speed or flawless execution. She took time with every chord, every phrase, savoring the resonance, exploring subtle changes in volume and rhythm, letting her emotions guide her. She remembered the blind girl's calm confidence, the way she seemed to move with the music rather than against it. It was a lesson in patience, in listening, in trusting one's heart. The pianist felt herself growing, learning in a way that went beyond technical skill. Throughout the day, performers came and went, practicing their pieces, preparing for upcoming events. The pianist watched them quietly, noting their techniques, their struggles, and their triumphs. She realized that each performer had their own story, their own journey, and their own way of expressing music. Some were confident, some hesitant, some bold, some delicate. She understood that judging based on appearances or assumptions was a mistake. Talent could be hidden, and determination could be invisible. The blind girl had proven that clearly later. She saw the blind girl arrive, moving with her usual quiet grace, guided by a familiar rhythm of steps. The pianist approached her, offering a warm smile. The girl returned it, calm and serene, her presence peaceful and inspiring. They spoke quietly, sharing thoughts about music, practice, and expression. The pianist asked about the techniques the blind girl used, how she memorized pieces, how she felt the music without sight. The conversation was enlightening, full of insights that went beyond theory or instruction. It was about feeling, connecting, and embracing challenges with courage. The blind girl spoke of patience and persistence, about trusting one's instincts, and about letting the music flow naturally. She shared small stories of her journey, moments of doubt overcome by determination, moments of triumph made sweeter by struggle. The pianist listened, captivated, and felt a shift within herself. She understood that true artistry was a combination of skill, emotion, dedication, and humility. It was about more than applause or recognition. It was about touching lives, creating meaning, and expressing oneself fully. As the day went on, the pianist felt inspired to experiment. She approached different pieces, some she had played countless times, others new and unfamiliar. She explored variations in tempo, subtle changes in dynamics, and different interpretations of familiar melodies. She listened carefully to the sounds, the resonance, and the way the room responded. Music had become a conversation rather than a performance, a way to explore, connect, and grow. The influence of the blind girl's presence and her previous performance shaped every choice. When it was time for another small gathering in the hall, the pianist and the blind girl were asked to perform again, this time side by side for a practice session rather than an audience. They chose a duet, carefully coordinating the flow, listening to each other, and adjusting naturally. The pianist was struck by how seamlessly the blind girl communicated through sound, feeling, and timing. There was no need for words. The connection was immediate, intuitive, and profound. Playing together became a dialogue, each responding to the other, building harmony and depth in ways the pianist had never experienced before. The music they created together was different from anything the pianist had performed alone. It was richer, more nuanced, and full of emotion. She could feel the resonance not just in her fingers, but in her chest and heart. The blind girl moved through the keys with grace and confidence, and the pianist felt herself learning, adapting, and growing with each measure. They experimented with dynamics, phrasing, and subtle tempo changes, discovering new expressions and possibilities. It was a collaborative experience, and it opened the pianist's mind to the power of listening and responding, of creating together rather than performing alone. After the duet, they sat together quietly, absorbing the experience. The pianist reflected on how far she had come in understanding music and herself. The blind girl had shown her that talent was not always obvious, that assumptions could be misleading, and that true mastery involved more than technical skill. It required heart, empathy, and the willingness to learn from others, even those she might have underestimated at first. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the lessons in music, but for the reminder of humility, patience, and connection. Over the next few weeks, the pianist continued to practice with renewed focus, inspired by what she had learned. She paid attention to the subtleties in every piece, explored emotional depths, and experimented with interpretations. The blind girl often joined her, sharing techniques, offering encouragement, and demonstrating the beauty of intuitive expression. Their partnership became a source of inspiration, both to themselves and to others who observed them. Together, they showed that music was not about competition, but about collaboration, understanding, and the shared experience of creation. The pianist began to notice changes in herself beyond her playing. She felt more patient, more open to new experiences, and more willing to listen and learn. She realized that growth came from embracing challenges, seeking inspiration, and recognizing the potential in others. The blind girl had taught her that true talent could emerge in unexpected ways, and that every person had a unique voice worth hearing. It was a lesson that extended far beyond music, into every part of life. One day, during a small recital at the hall, the pianist found herself watching the audience differently. She noticed their reactions not to judge but to understand, to feel the connection that music could create. She played with authenticity, allowing her heart to guide her fingers, and for the first time, she felt fully immersed in the experience. The audience responded with warmth and attention, not just to her skill, but to the emotion and sincerity in her performance. She realized that this was what true music was about: connection, expression, and shared humanity. After the recital, the pianist and the blind girl sat together, reflecting on their journey. They spoke of challenges, growth, and the moments that had shaped them. The pianist felt a deep respect and admiration, not just for the girl's skill, but for her perseverance, grace, and ability to inspire. She understood that this was the essence of greatness: the ability to overcome obstacles, to share one's gift, and to elevate others along the way. In the weeks that followed, the pianist approached every performance with a renewed sense of purpose. She played not for recognition, not for validation, but for the joy of expression, for the connection with the audience, and for the love of music itself. The lessons she had learned from the blind girl guided her approach, reminding her to be patient, authentic, and open. She discovered a depth of creativity and emotional resonance she had never experienced before, and it transformed her both as a musician and as a person. The blind girl continued to inspire not only the pianist, but everyone who had the chance to witness her talent and dedication. She demonstrated that limitations could be overcome, that dedication and heart mattered more than appearances, and that music had the power to change perceptions, inspire growth, and touch lives. Through her, the pianist had discovered a new understanding of music, artistry, and the human spirit. And in that understanding, she found a sense of fulfillment, purpose, and a profound respect for the transformative power of talent, perseverance, and connection. By the time they left the hall that day, the pianist carried with her a new perspective. She had learned that music was not about comparison, competition, or ego. It was about expression, empathy, and the courage to share one's heart. She knew that the lessons she had learned would stay with her forever, guiding her performances, shaping her growth, and reminding her that greatness could be found in unexpected places. The blind girl had changed not just her perception of music, but her understanding of what it meant to truly connect, inspire, and create. And with that realization, the pianist stepped forward into the next chapter of her journey, ready to embrace every note, every melody, and every opportunity with an open heart.